Hello, everybody. My name is Sean Fruin. I am the Mechanical Applications Product Owner over at IMEG. And today we're going to be talking about MEP project storytelling with Power BI and the data connector. So I'm a mechanical engineer trying to get people to use Revit, engineers specifically to use Revit. And there's kind of like the three horsemen of why engineers don't use Revit or why people get frustrated with Revit. One, I'd say, is just the siloed data. Right? It's in all these different programs. It's hard to aggregate all that data together. Another one is just bulky files. Sometimes opening up Revit files just takes a lot of time, especially on big like hospital projects and stuff like that. And so that tends to be a barrier of entry. Another one is just the learning curve is pretty steep. Revit is a very dense program. Engineers aren't taught Revit in school, unlike architects. So there's just a big learning curve there. And therefore, a lot of the Revit data does not get utilized. And that's a shame. So today we're going to talk about how we can hopefully get that done. And we're going to do that with two new kind of superhero duo. And that is the Autodesk Data Exchange and the Power BI connector for it. So at IMEG, we've actually started to use Power BI for other tools, and we have some awesome people. I'm going to show you a little demo here, but we already have some tools in place where we're starting to get and see traction of senior engineers using these tools early on in projects. And we do some stuff with looking at our tool utilization. So Power BI is definitely kind of already in place, and we have traction on it throughout the organization, which is really cool. So here's a little demo of something. So we have Rachel Butchie here. She is once an architect and then kind of switched into graphical design. So she's really good at making these clean, neat, beautiful Power BIs that you start entering your data in. This is something that's used at the early stages of a project. So here we start inputting that data in. This is hard entry. So one of the ideas is, hey, maybe we could use Data Exchange to pull some of this data in. As you can see, a really nice UI experience here, really easy for a senior engineer to come in here and go through the process. Unlike Revit, where you've got stuff everywhere. Here we're doing like system selection, and then we kind of get total energy usage. And so a really cool preliminary tool. So yeah, so watching that and seeing all the Power BIs that have been created throughout the organization, and then witnessing the data exchange and the Power BI connector really got my wheels turning on what could we do, to bridge that gap and get best of both worlds, the robust data in Revit and the nice user experience in Power BI. So really got my wheels turning. So that's what we're going to kind of cover today. So one thing we're going to look at connecting Revit MEP data to Power BI via the data exchange. Then we're going to look at building some dashboards and kind of telling that story from SD to CD and different visualizations we can make. And then what I love about the Power BI, the connector the most, is the visualization of geometry. So we're going to walk through that and even do a little demo. So our agenda, first we're going to just kind of cover Data Exchange 101, Power BI 101. Then we have electrical workflow, aggregating data across our different data sources, aggregating that. It's going to be about spaces. And then we'll get into kind of this idea of the storytelling from SD to CD and how we can take snapshots of the project throughout the life cycle using Data Exchange. So first, what is Data Exchange? It's definitely not a file. It's not really a database. It's a data exchange, right? So it's something a little bit different than all those. They live on ACC docs. So here we can see a whole bunch of data exchanges saved up here. What's interesting too is if you look at the file size, there's like 0 file size on it. But if you go ahead and click on this, we can zoom in and then go to the viewer. And you can start to see that geometry. If you click on elements in there, you can actually see some of the properties and stuff. You can see if you're up to date with the most current, and when that was published. And there's even some information there about the data exchange itself. and that it automatically updates stuff. So really cool. You actually get like a data trail, which is really interesting and awesome. Right, some really cool stuff in here that you can do with the viewer, print, view stuff. So again, even a kind of senior engineer could come in here and navigate this, click around, see stuff, and that's probably a little bit even better than, you know, them having to open up Revit. And then we can add these data exchanges to different packages. So a lot of options here, and the ecosystem's just growing and getting bigger. So fun time to be alive. And then let's take a step back and kind of talk about this a little bit more. So I think there's a bigger trend going on here that this starts to cover. So Autodesk definition of a data exchange is this, but I think the key words in here is that we can share, right, curated data, so data that we want from different sources, and really in a granular fashion. So I don't have to share my whole Revit project. I could just share the duct systems, the electrical systems, the space data. I don't have to share the big bulky file to whoever I'm sharing with. I can give them this granular piece of the project. And then what's really interesting too is these different pieces can then come together on the cloud to actually make a whole project. And I kind of think that's where we're starting to head. So that kind of shows this point here where we have the different apps, right, across. So the, you know, architect might build the facade and put that into the cloud, that piece. Or they might be using Rhino and build something on that and then put that into the cloud. Then another company could consume that. Let's say they're doing the fabrication for electrical. So they could pick and choose what they want to consume, and all these kind of building blocks come up in the cloud to build our cloud information model, if you will, rather than a BIM information model. So then data control is another one, and this kind of gets into the Power BI stuff. So a lot of times there's like proprietary data. I've seen this on the mechanical side where we don't want the risk of sharing our model because we don't want to kind of show this all the calculations, all the parameters that make the end results just for liability issues. So let's us pare it down. There's also a lot of control with the new GraphQL stuff coming out that lets you really filter a big kind of data lake of data down to exactly what you want. And so that's kind of a new paradigm shift too of this whole GraphQL way of doing it. So there's a couple different forms of connectors, right? There's connectors that will write, and then there's connectors that will read. And there's a whole bunch of different flavors. I like to think of this as like Baskin Robbins, right? 31 flavors. There's a whole bunch of different flavors of connectors, and this list is growing every day. And then here's kind of that read and write breakdown where, you know, Revit can write data exchanges, Rhino can write data exchanges, Inventor can write data exchanges, Dynamo can write. And I'm sure there's a longer list now, they keep on adding. But then we have read, right? So Power Automate, for example, can only read a data exchange. Power BI can only read a data exchange. But you can also read with those other ones. So some of them kind of cross both chasms. In Revit, you can read or you can consume a data exchange. So again, kind of breaking that idea again up a little bit more, right? We can see again where we have this big cloud idea. And now we have these different authoring softwares that then can consume, that you can send up data exchanges, or you can consume data exchanges. So you could use the APIs on the, you know, to be a contractor that wants to consume the conduit from the MEP model. Or maybe I'm, again, the senior engineer that wants to consume the data for my Power BI, and I can view it that way. So there are some pre-checks to get started on this. You need to have an AEC project. You need to actually activate the app or download the app. You have to have the right permissions and the right licenses. So there is kind of getting all your ducks in a row. There is a couple steps. And while we were going through this first couple times, we ran into some issues. One of the issues that we ran into was I did not have administrative permissions to go ahead and go download these data exchange connectors on ACC. I reached out to my VDC, and there's kind of a push and pull there because he was worried about token count. To date, no tokens are used for data exchanges. I'm not sure if that will change, but right now you don't have to worry about tokens. So I was able to go ahead and get the stuff downloaded. And then once it is downloaded, you can see that, all the stuff becomes activated. Then we ran into the permissions issue. So I was working with Brian here, who's at Allied Vim, and we were working together doing some stuff, and he did not have access to the project, so I just had to give him access, and then we were good to go. So that's kind of on the AEC side, and then there's the connector side, right? Again, you have to download the app, have the right licenses. So if you're trying to use Rhino connector and you don't have a license to Rhino, then you're in trouble. So you have to download the app on ACC like we showed, and you have to download the actual application. So if you don't have Revit, you're not going to be able to make or consume a data exchange. So here's just a little demo of going through the Autodesk App Store and downloading the connectors to get everything set up. So here I'm going to go Data Exchange. Here we can see the list. When these videos were recorded, they were in early access. I think they're all out of early access and beta. So you might not have to do some of these steps. You can see you have to go on there, download the application. I was just messing with Revit 2025 new install, and you still had to download the connector, this MSI file. All right, so now let's dig into Power BI 101. So Power BI is really interesting to me. I thought it was just this topmost value when I first got into it before kind of exploring the data exchange. I thought, you got some data and then you made visualizations and that was easy. Turns out there's a lot more to Power BI that really helps you manage and consume large amounts of data. And this is the data transforms pieces, the data modeling where we can connect data together. And then the DAX, the data analyst expressions, where you can go ahead and use the data to make calculations. So sum up all the room area or something like that. Right, there's a lot of puzzle pieces to Power BI. Not as easy as I thought. The whole idea here, though, is that we can make really good visuals. Tons of different apps for it. One of them is Autodesk Data Exchange at this point. We have all the visualizations. We can share dashboards with people. And so we're going to be using the Power BI desktop. All right, all this stuff does live in the cloud, but we can pull in Salesforce data, Excel data, really data from anywhere and aggregate that data across. So some pretty powerful stuff. Then kind of a workflow, typical workflow, right? We're going to fetch data from multiple sources. In this case, we'll fetch data. In one of the examples from the Data Exchange, we have another one we're going to fetch data from Trace 3D Plus, which is the load software. Then we're going to have to clean that data. Then we're going to have to build relationships between that data. And then we're going to use DAX to calculate measures. Then we're going to build the dashboard, and then we can send that dashboard off into the cloud for others to share and see. You might not go through all these workflows, but that's the typical workflow. So another kind of tricky thing that I find with Power BI is you have all the data, that's great, but then how are we going to visualize this data? I found this off the internet, but this is a pretty good kind of map of what you're trying to show that shows all the kind of different visualizations. This isn't an exhausted list of visualization options, but it's a good breakdown of the main ones and ones you might use. All right, so let's hop into our first example now that we have a good understanding of what Data Exchange is and what Power BI is and how we're going to use it. And so for this first example, we want to looking at the electrical distribution system and kind of doing a QA/QC check where we can pull that data from Revit, get into Power BI, and let a senior engineer review the data. So some pain points here. We actually talked to users about this throughout our electrical team. Some senior engineers don't even have access to Revit. So their typical workflow would be on PDFs and stuff. We can do better than that. We also got the complaint that, again, Revit models are huge. For me to open this hospital project, it's going to take 20 minutes. We use VDIs. They're not the best sometimes on opening large Revit models. So that's actually a pain point that comes up a lot when we talk to users. And even if you do get the Revit model open, there's no really high analytics tools or visualization tools. There are schedules and everything, but there's no way to have like those clean user, simple UX, UI kind of analytics within Revit. So for this one, our data source is all the electrical stuff from the Revit project. You can see that we have a whole bunch of schedules. So we have all this data inside the model, but it's all kind of locked away in these schedules where we can't really see. We do have some highlight stuff if a circuit's over. I'm not an electrical engineer, but might show here. But if a circuit's overloaded, we do have some QAs, QCs, but I think we can do better with Power BI. So here we're going to look at creating the data exchange from Power BI. So first we're going to make a view where we only want to show the stuff that we want in the data exchange. So here I'm using just visibility graphics to go ahead and filter down that stuff. All right, and then after adding the app, we have under collaborate, we have the data exchange window. So now we're going to create a data exchange from this 3D view. Name it, and upload it to the cloud. So it does take some time sometimes if you have a really big Revit model. So again, the idea here is not to put your whole Revit model in the data exchange, but to get to this granular level, we're only putting some pieces of the data exchange, of the Revit model into the data exchange. It wasn't really designed to do the whole model. I think they're kind of working on that with the AEC data stuff. So I was building it. So now we're going to go into Power Automate or Power BI, pardon me, and we are going to consume this data. So first we have to go ahead and get the connector. So here I'm just going to get data. And I get the Autodesk Data Power BI thing. I've already gone and downloaded the app. I put my units in. I have my data exchange, the URL actually of the data exchange. And now I'm navigating through my ACC projects, finding the right project. And then finding that data exchange that I just made. So next step then would be to transform the data. So here there's a lot of data in here, right? And now we can start to filter down to just the stuff that we need for the workflow that we're trying to do. So this is the data transform. So here you can see all the different parameters that are coming in with each element. And so I'm going to go down to just get mains. So I'm looking for the main distribution panels. And then I'm looking for estimated total demand. And now I'm going to filter down to get rid of all the lighting fixtures and all the stuff that doesn't meet that criteria. So it's really cool about when I first started Power BI messing with this, I was actually writing this almost as code. What's really nice about Power BI is you kind of do these steps and you can see in there the applied steps. It remembers those steps. So it's a really low code way of kind of transferring the data where it's click, 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 but then those steps are recorded. So if you wanted to upload another data exchange in the future, those steps would be remembered. So yeah, it's a really nifty way, low code, to be able to do this. So now we're setting some things. We want equals electrical equipment. So again, now we're just filtering the rows out to eliminate even more data. Now we want to get rid of those nulls. Nulls are never good. And again, let's get rid of the nulls over here under the panel name. I think it's a good point with these nulls to bring up, like data. The cleanness of the data is important. So getting better at modeling in Revit is going to be crucial for kind of this next step that we're trying to do in the industry of using that data. You don't want nulls, you want stuff to be modeled correctly. Now you can see we have a nice list of just 18 main panels. And we can move on to the next step. So now we're going to construct the dashboard. So in this one, we're just going to use a table. And we're going to use this chart that kind of shows you a total and then a percent. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, how much can I put on this panel? How much load can I put on this panel? And then how much is actually applied to the panel. Start it here real quick. So the search is really nice. Now I'm going to start putting in the parameter name, or the parameters I'm looking for. So here we got panel name, and that will be my x-axis. Oh, pardon me, mains are on my main axis. So sum of mains there we have. Oh, there we go. So now we have the sum of mains there. Now I want to get that estimated demand total. And I'll also put that on the x-axis. So panel name was on the y-axis. And so now what this is showing is, none of my panels are overly loaded. And you can see that real easily through the purple is what it could be. And then the blue is what's actually loaded on the panel. We can come in here and do some formatting, make it different colors to make it pop a little bit more. You can duplicate visuals. Start laying out a really nice dashboard. So this is kind of another way to display the information. What I really like about Power BI, notice if we click in one visual, it kind of highlights that in the other visual. And of course, engineers like their tables. Let's go ahead and actually add a table with the raw data in it. So you have to click on the visual, and then I'm going to pull in the parameters I want to show in this table. So the first parameter is going to be the panel name. And then I can go ahead and click through here and add whatever parameters I want to show in this table. Again, this really lets us, you can click on one row in the table and see the visual highlight up in the other visuals. And we can go ahead and start adding some more parameters. That's right. It's like a Revit schedule, but we have the visuals to go along with it. A little bit better user experience and a little bit better storytelling. All right. So that's kind of the electrical one. So what do we get, right? We got this Power BI where we can unlock the Revit data, get it into a program that the senior engineer can use. Much more simpler data, much easier navigation. And then, of course, we get the live updates from Revit whenever a data exchange is updated. That's that example. So now let's go on to the example with mechanical spaces dashboard. So this has a cool backstory to it. But first, the problem, again, stubborn engineers, they don't want to be in Revit. That's no fun. Poor user experience for Revit, kind of the same as electrical engineer. But a big thing I think mechanical has, electrical doesn't, is for like loads programs. I'm a mechanical engineer, so maybe I'm biased, but mechanical engineering is a little bit more complicated because we're reliant on the geometry, and a lot of times we have third-party load programs, so the interoperability gets really frustrating. So to aggregate all that data would be amazing. So the first approach when Data Exchange first came out is I work a lot with energy modeling and spaces and using Revit spaces, but Data Exchange did not include the space geometry. So if you know Revit, in space geometry, it's not really visible in Revit. It is on floor plans, but you need a 3D view to create the data exchange, so it wasn't really visible. So the first kind of hack that I had to do was go ahead and recreate it using Dynamo, and that worked, but wasn't ideal. This was the data exchange. This is an example of how you can, make a data exchange through Dynamo using Dynamo geometry. You can add parameters also to that geometry. So nifty stuff there, but not really necessary. So something came out later that after talking to some of the product owners on Data Exchange, they actually made it so the room and space geometry is now included with the Data Exchange. That was big props to them. Very thankful that they did that. So now we can go ahead and create a data exchange from the space stuff, get that onto the cloud, and then consume that. So in this workflow, we're going to do that with the spaces. We have a lot of data in there, but then we have a loads program in Trace 3D Plus. We're also going to grab that data and then aggregate it into Power BI. All right, so our sources of data again is the Revit spaces and the loads data that we then took into Excel to get into Power BI. So here's creating the data exchange from Revit. So in this one, we took a little bit of an approach where I think we are actually creating it from the latest published version. So this is a way that you can get automatic updates whenever a new version of Revit is published. And when that new version of Revit is published, we can go in here and see the data exchange also get updated. Right now we can go into the viewer again and start to see the data exchange. One of the interesting things is why I have the floors in here is you still have to have a visible piece of 3D geometry. So therefore, I knew there wasn't too many floors, so I added the floors. But embedded in this, because you can't actually see it, is the space geometry. maybe we can get that in there as a transparent layer or something. But we'll see that you can see that geometry inside the Power Automate or Power BI. All right, so I was going to go into a live demo a little bit to see if we can kind of show some of this. And so let's do that. So I'm going to start from kind of a blank project here. And right, first thing I need to do is go ahead and get data. And I'm going to go to more. I'll type in Autodesk. And I do not have it installed. That's not good. I think just for sake of time, we will skip the live demo and come back to it if we have time. I will keep going. I was trying to get the latest update. They have some cool stuff that just came out, but that seemed to backfire. So let's go back into Power BI. So the idea was here that, right, I can show you. We were getting the space data, aggregating that with Trace 3D Plus data. We're able to do that, and then you could even share it on a website. So we got the connected data between space geometry, space parameters within Revit, and Trace 3D Plus. Right? Again, the geometry plus data, I think, is huge for mechanical engineers. You really need the geometry to check and validate kind of the loads data. And then the auto updates, because we created the data exchange using the publish model method. So anytime there's an update to the spaces, right, our Power BI would automatically update. But going on to this other idea is this idea of the project evolutions. This is something that I've thought about a lot, because what we do a lot of times is we make decisions either in rules of thumb or simplified model and SD. Then the project evolves. Then we do calculations again. And we kind of lose that data, at least in the Revit model, from the SD or preliminary calculations. So right, I wanted to kind of collect that data and then compare it in Power BI. So are we making the right assumptions in SD? I don't know. Let's make a Power BI to do it. Again, there might be data loss. So we don't want data loss. That's not great. And then we can start to even see the design impacts as the project evolves. So that's the whole idea here. And again, this idea that we lose kind of the energy model each time we create a new energy model, we don't want to do that. So here, right, we might have this hotel where in schematic design, we make big assumptions where it's just a tower. We put in some U values across the whole project, big assumptions on those U values. Then we get into a little more design development where, you know, U values might change, the geometry changes. And then, of course, we get kind of in the last phase with architects still making changes on us. U values might still be changing. Geometry is definitely still changing. And so we want to take snapshots of this along the way. So in this one, you can see we do run all these loads. And we get a lot of data out of it. So now I'm going to actually take the analytical energy model stuff and create a data exchange from that. And so now this will bring in all the loads and all the information from that. And so there we actually have a loads model that is a data exchange. So pretty cool stuff. Again, an engineer can come through here, kind of click, look at the parameters, filter down. So some pretty cool stuff there. All right, and then this process iterates. So the whole idea here is that we can create data exchanges throughout, get snapshots. So we're going to take a data exchange. We don't want this one to actually update automatically because we kind of want it to be a snapshot. And then, you know, each time the building changes, each time we rerun loads or whatever, we can take a new snapshot, and then we can start to compare across. So one of the limitations of the old Power BI connector was you couldn't put multi-data exchanges into one viewer. That is actually what I was going to play around with for this demo. Now you can do that. So you could even now take these 3 data exchanges and overlap them and maybe compare differences and stuff like that. So some improvements there. And that opens up a lot of more workflows where, again, we're taking maybe data exchanges from different authoring tools and combining them into one viewer. So the results of that workflow is that we are keeping a good record, right? We have the snapshot of the SD stuff, CD. So we have this kind of project evolving thing. I'd love to get a little bit more sexier Power BI, take some hints from Rachel to lay that out. We also have the geometry in there, along with the data again. And I think this starts to, again, lay out this idea of the Autodesk's vision moving forward with all this cloud stuff and the APS. Autodesk Platform Services. So this is a quote from my friend over at Bird Tools, right? The whole thing is this idea of decentralizing open data. Rather than assets being stored in files, these proprietary files you need licenses to, right? It's going to be this bigger database that's in the cloud. And then really we're transforming to this cloud idea. I think the whole data exchange is just one piece of Autodesk's future. And right, this is all coming from because BIM hasn't really been working. You know, architect does a whole bunch of work, they hand it off. We then start with theirs. There's issues with the handoff. We almost start over. We kind of have to wait until they're almost done with their design to utilize it. Then we do our thing, and then we hand it off to the contractor. And we're really handing off these big, bulky files, even with being able to put the models up in the cloud. So Autodesk, great platform services. The idea is accessibility, trust, no silos, better data, and still handle security. So what I think that looks like in the future is we all are sending our stuff up to the cloud using different programs. Then stakeholders on the other end can consume stuff from different design levels. I always think about a lot of times with loads, there's an issue with trying to use like a DD or CD model for loads. I actually want that SD model that the architect built to build loads. I need a simplified model. So I think this would open the door for something like that. You could see like an SD model is really what's in Forma. So if I can consume Forma model at any point in the analysis or any point of the project life cycle, because I need to do analysis on simple geometry like that, this would kind of unlock that door. That is it. So thank you for coming. As you can see, the Power BI opens a lot of opportunities for storytelling of data, curating data, better UX, better use of our data, and reach out if you have questions, and it's ever evolving. So thank you all for joining me. And that is it.